Welcome to the RotoWire Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson, and the big top 400 prospect rankings update is live on the site. Last week's one of my busiest weeks of the year. It's a tsunami of Dynasty first-year player content, plus the biggest, most important top 400 update of the year. So, yes, top 400 prospect rankings for Dynasty Leagues are fully updated. YouTube 15 for 15% off of those. The team top 20s are also fully updated. I've now got blurbs on 165 FYPD prospects in the FYPD rankings, which also includes tiers, ETAs, potential positions, etc. The 6th annual first-year player draft blueprint is also live on the site. So just tons of first-year player draft content up there. I've also written the outlooks for over 250 of the prospects on the top 400. So if you have any questions about a specific player, there's a good chance I wrote them up already on the site. So check out their player page. And then a reminder, if you're using the top 400 prospect rankings, you got to make sure you're utilizing the My Leagues tool on the site. It's going to save you hours of waiver wire scouting throughout the year by letting you know exactly which players are available in your league. And additionally, last year we introduced a feature that allows you to exclude the FYPD prospects or isolate them from the top 400 prospect rankings. So I know a lot of you are using the prospect rankings for non-FYPD purposes or strictly for FYPD purposes, and that'll allow you to kind of filter those players in or out. I also think you can exclude just the FYPD prospects if you want by going to the year signed and using that as one of the filters and excluding players who are signed after 2025. Anyway, that's enough shilling. YouTube 15 if you want 50% off and access to everything I'll be discussing today. But as always, here's a mailbag with all your questions about the updated top 400 prospect rankings. I had a couple comments to start things off just about it being the golden age of shortstops or holy shortstops Batman. These were comments, not questions, but I did want to take a second to kind of comment on the fact that 8 of the top 9 prospects are listed as shortstops. So we list minor leaguers by the position they played the majority of their games at the prior season, because that's the position they're eligible at in fantasy leagues. However, these players won't all end up at shortstop, and I'll go through each guy and you'll kind of see. Connor Griffin of the Pirates, he can play center field. He's probably going to end up at shortstop. Kevin McGonigal of the Tigers, a lot of detractors regarding his shortstop defense. There are some supporters out there. That's obviously where he fits most cleanly onto the Tigers roster, but he's also just a natural fit at second base. I think he probably retains shortstop eligibility for a couple of years, but maybe not. McGonigal might end up at second base sooner than later. Jesus Mate of the Brewers, likely to end up at third base long-term, especially with Cooper Pratt in the same system, likely reaching the majors ahead of Mate and being the superior shortstop defender. Leo DeVries of the Athletics, he's likely going to be the A's second baseman of the future. Sebastian Walcott of the Rangers, he could stick at shortstop, but he could just as easily debut at third base and never leave that post. Aiden Miller of the Phillies, Colt Emerson of the Mariners, very capable shortstops, but they're likely to man third base for their teams as long as Trey Turner and JP Crawford are around. And similarly, JJ Weatherholt of the Cardinals, he's either going to play third base, second base, or both this season. So of those 8 shortstops, it's possible that half or even less than half are eligible at shortstop in 2027. So, if you played baseball, the best player usually plays shortstop. I think that's just kind of still being filtered out with these 8 players, and I think at least half of them end up moving off a shortstop long term. Todd says, how much weight does proximity to the majors carry? If you were to rank the top 10 on just raw talent, how similar would the top 10 look? Who would be in, who would be out, if any different? So Todd asks a fun yet very challenging question here. I had to narrow down who I think the top 10 players are on just raw talent. I guess I'm going to interpret that as if all the prospects just reach their absolute ceiling, how would they rank for fantasy? So Connor Griffin, I think, would be number 1 still with the Pirates. I'd have Jesus Mate of the Brewers at number 2. I'd have Sebastian Walcott of the Rangers at number 3. I'd have Joshua Baez of the Cardinals at number 4. I'd have Eduardo Quintero of the Dodgers at 5. I'd have Dax Kilby of the Yankees at 6. I'd have Seth Hernandez, first pitcher of the Pirates, at 7. I'd have Kevin McGonigal at 8. I'd have Leo DeVries of the A's at 9. And I'd have Steele Hall of the Reds at 10. So someone asked another question about like proximity versus ceiling, because Joshua Baez and Edward Florentino of the Pirates and Elmer Rodriguez of the Yankees are available in their FYPD. And they wanted to make sure that they weren't going for proximity over upside by taking those non-FYPD players who are available to them. And, proximity versus upside, it's always discussed. There's always people trying to like read between the lines of my rankings. Like, wait, is this a proximity ranking? Is this an upside ranking? Are you ranking for upside? Are you ranking for proximity? Like, there's another big third element that I think people just associate with proximity, but it's just this sort of confidence or certainty factor with the players. So like Kevin McGonigal and Leo DeVries are great examples. I've got them both in my top 5, but I had them both in the 6 to 10 range of this question for just, ultimate ceiling. But the reason McGonigal and DeVries are, I think, 2nd and 4th on my top 400 respectively is because I'm extremely confident that those guys are going to have long careers. They're going to be very useful in fantasy for a long time. I'm not confident that either guy is going to be a first-round pick in their prime. But I know you're going to be able to get a ton of value out of McGonigal and DeVries. So it's just there's proximity. I think of proximity as more kind of like, this guy's big league ready. You can use him right away. Maybe he's 24, 25, something like that. But I also think there's just this other layer of sort of certainty and confidence that people sort of exclude when they're talking about proximity versus upside. But anyways, like to that question about are you sacrificing upside if you take Joshua Baez or Florentino or Rodriguez? I don't think you are, obviously, because I have Baez here as having a very high ceiling. I think Florentino has a very high ceiling. He didn't quite make this top 10 just because I'm not 100% confident in it being a 5-category outlay. I think you look at like players who go in the first round of fantasy drafts, they're 5-category contributors, right? So Steele Hall shows up here because he has that upside of being like a true 5-category contributor. Dax Kilby obviously does. Eduardo Quintero does. Joshua Baez does. If I don't think you really have that first round upside, I wasn't going to really include you here. But like with McGonigal and DeVries, like they could be first rounders in their prime, but they're ranked in the top 5 as much because of just how unlikely it is that they disappoint more than anything. Like it's not as much about proximity as much as it is about safety. Okay. The McHugh says, what's the overall state of the list compared to this point in past years? He says there's 25 MLB regulars in the top 100, 5 stars, more firepower, less. So my big takeaways from this set of prospect rankings is that a lot of the best, highest ceiling prospects have less experience above A ball than in a typical year. We went through that with like the top 5. The shortstops, like they've all reached AA, but they haven't played at AAA, with the exception of Weatherholt and Emerson and Miller. But like the really high end guys, like we still haven't seen them at AAA yet. That's not typically the case. Usually you'll see at least 1 or 2 of the top 5 guys being someone that debuted the prior season. And then the other the guys that did debut, they're all these slugger types, right? It's Samuel Basayo of the Orioles, Bryce Eldridge of the Giants, Sal Stewart. He's going to chip in some steals, but you're really buying the bat with Sal Stewart. Carter Jensen of the Royals, another one. Dylan Beavers is like the highest ranked sort of power speed guy who's already debuted. So it's light on just the superstar type of guys having already debuted. And then it's also just incredibly loaded in terms of pitching prospects, which I know it's not what anyone wants to hear. But I do think there's more high-end pitching prospects this year than in a typical year. I have 50 pitching prospects in my top 135. I have 32 pitching prospects in the top 100. I have 25 pitching prospects in the top 75. those are all higher figures than on a normal update. Like I've had updates before where there's been fewer than 25 pitchers in the top 100. So I think that's partly because of the loaded college pitching draft class from 2025. But I think it's also just we've got a greater number of these high-end pitching prospects who got to the big leagues but didn't exhaust their eligibility. And then another dozen guys that are nearly big league ready. So those are kind of my two big takeaways, is that the very best sort of power speed upside guys, none of them have really gotten close to the big leagues, and then just an absolutely loaded class of pitching prospects. Mike says, what causes big drops or rises during the off season? So it's a lot of factors, but essentially I'm taking the last set of rankings that I submitted at the end of the regular season and trying to make them better by spending more time and using more information to evaluate each prospect. I obviously can't take several months to do in-season updates, but that's the great thing about this update. I literally get to spend 3.5 months working on it and just uncovering as much information as I can, diving as deep on these guys as I can. Like, I didn't spend much time evaluating Connor Griffin on this update or the last update, but I probably spent like 10 times as much time evaluating certain prospects for this update as I did for the last update. And then additionally, there's just more information available on prospects from sources, from other scouting services in the offseason than there is during the season. There's also just a lot of player movement that affects the timelines and short-term value of these players. I'm looking at like, what do projections say about the players who are big league ready? Just a lot more information available in November, December, January than there is in the season. And I also just get to spend way more time looking at these guys. So this is, in my opinion, the biggest, most important update of the season because I've gotten to spend the most time on it. Danny J says, does Rainiel Rodriguez of the Cardinals have room to rise, or will the rain stop at around 11 in the ranks? I love the way Danny J gets creative with his questions. So Rainiel Rodriguez, I think he's got room to rise, especially if the Cardinals pull him off catcher. I haven't been this excited about a non-speed hitting prospect since Vladimir Guerrero, which is a long time ago. And obviously Guerrero graduated as the number 1 overall prospect back then. So Rainiel Rodriguez he's just a premium offensive talent. I'd love it if they pulled him off catcher. That would give him a better chance of eventually being like a top 3, top 5 dynasty prospect, but just a supremely talented hitter. Fantasy baseball guy says, I guess I should be targeting Joshua Baez of the Cardinals at the end of my NL auction. When do you anticipate his call up? Well, the Cardinals still have some roster organizing to do with Brendan Donovan, potentially Lars Nootbaar. I'm not sure what the new regime's approach is going to be in terms of just like how much time do they want to give guys like Victor Scott and Nathan Church to sort of see what they have. I do expect Baez to be one of the most impressive players in spring camp. And I think he is clearly their right fielder of the future to me. So Jordan Walker's play will also loom large in determining how quickly Baez is up. If I'm taking Baez in NL only or in draft and hold leagues, I already have taken him in a draft and hold league. I'm expecting like 250 to 300 plate appearances from Baez in 2026. So I'm not drafting him as if he's going to be up in April. But I do think he plays enough that he's at least a worthwhile pick in NL only and certainly draft and hold leagues. I took him in the meatball draft. So I was the first person to take Joshua Baez in a NFBC league. And I think I took him in the 40th round. He's going quite a bit higher than that now. So I'm going to be working on volume 2 of my top prospects for 2026 redraft leagues here. That's my next big project, but yeah, I'm not sure if I would chase Baez quite as high as he's going right now, but I do think you'll get 200 plus plate appearances from him and a chance for much more than that. Paul Tomei says, Walker Jenkins of the Twins just seems he should be higher, hoping he's up soon this year and raking. Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I mean, it does feel really weird. I've got Walker Jenkins at number 17. Just, a couple of years ago, I thought he had a very realistic chance of being like a top 5 prospect at this point in his development, if not having already graduated at this point in his development. But, if I thought Jenkins would be up early in 2026 and or he didn't have this mounting injury history, he'd probably be ahead of some of the pitchers, probably ahead of like Bryce Eldridge, Sal Stewart, Josh Baez. But that's just under the assumption that he's up early and that he doesn't carry what I perceive to be more injury risk than the rest of these position players. I'm worried about like May 10th, Jenkins pulls his hamstring and then he's missing the first 6 weeks at AAA. Like, that's in the back of my head, but I'm right there with you, Paul. Like, it definitely feels like he should be higher. It's kind of scary not having Walker Jenkins higher than number 17 right now. But they've got so many outfielders they've got to kind of sort through. I definitely think like Rainiel Rodriguez gets a look before Jenkins. I really like Austin Martin. I think they're going to try playing Matt Woolner every day. Trevor Larnock's still on the team. So like, I don't think we see Walker Jenkins all that soon here in 2025. And we might not even see him until late August, depending on his health and how he's performing. Caleb Benoit says, who is this year's Luke Keaschall? So Keaschall, who he reached AA in 2024. I ranked Keaschall number 25 on my January 2025 update. So a year ago, Keaschall was ranked number 25 with zero experience above AAA. He was valued more in like the 45 to 60 range by the big public sites. So I'm looking for a player with upper level experience that I'm higher on than the consensus, with sort of a murky 2026 MLB timeline. It's not a great comp in terms of just the types of hitters they are and the types of fantasy assets they are, but I think Ryan Waldschmidt of the Diamondbacks, who I've got ranked number 22, but who I expect to be more kind of in that 40 to 50 range on real life lists. Like, Waldschmidt is probably a guy that I would say I'm planting my flag on, so to speak, the way I did Keaschall last year. And I do think Waldschmidt's up for a good chunk of this season, like Keaschall would have been last year if he hadn't gotten hurt. Fantasy baseball guy says, do you see Edward Florentino of the Pirates as a future top 5 prospect? It's definitely possible. The two main things for Florentino to do in 2026 would just be to be better against left-handed pitching. He could not hit lefties last year in a very small sample. I fully expect him to get better at that, but I'd like to see him get better at that. And then I just would like to see Florentino continue to use the speed on the bases, continue to play outfield, continue to kind of show that he's a better athlete than advertised. If he does both of those things, then I would say he's kind of tracking towards that top 5 range. Thomas Nestico, TJ Stats on Twitter. First time I think Thomas has sent in a question. So welcome, Thomas. And he says, I'm quite surprised by the Carter Jensen of the Royals omission from the top 25. He said omission. I tweeted out my picture of the top 25. So obviously I didn't omit Jensen from the rankings, but he wasn't in the top 25. Thomas says, do you have any concerns with his bat translating and or him sticking at catcher? So this question probably made me think the most, because I do like Jensen a lot, and I didn't expect his ranking at number 34 to be perceived as too low. I don't really know what other people are doing. Like, I try to avoid other sets of dynasty rankings. So I'm not sure if other people have Jensen like top 10, top 15 or whatever, but I really respect Thomas, and I understand what he likes so much about Jensen. I think the big problem is that he's a catcher, and it's so hard to rank catchers in a way that's translatable across dynasty leagues. I've got Samuel Basallo and Rainiel Rodriguez ranked top 15 because I think they each have number 1 overall catcher upside in fantasy, and I think they could be top 5 fantasy first baseman if they have to move off of catcher. Like projection system, oopsie, Jordan Rosenblum's elite projection system, Oopsie, has Basayo for a 205 ISO and Jensen for a 173 ISO this year, despite Basayo being over a year younger. But I see that argument that like they're going basically right next to each other in redraft leagues, Basayo and Jensen. So why is one guy, almost 30 spots lower than the other guy? I think I should probably have Jensen at least a few spots higher than I do here, down at 34. But to answer Thomas's specific questions, I don't have concerns about his bat translating or him sticking catcher, but I don't know what a full season of Carter Jensen is going to look like. And if Jensen went out and did exactly what the ATC projections think he'll do, which is a 241 average, 317 OBP, 407 slug, 10 homers in 92 games. Like I'll take the over on the homers there, but that's ATC's projection. And like if he went out and did that, it would just be completely laughable to have had him ranked in the top 20 for dynasty prospect rankings. So it's really tough to rank catchers in a way that makes sense across leagues and across formats. Like I play in some dynasty leagues where only 15 or only 20 catchers are started, like 15 team one catcher league, 20 team one catcher league. And if you kind of compare like Jensen to, number 10 on the catcher rankings, number 15 on the catcher rankings, like he kind of feels like he belongs in that range. And there's going to be teams in those leagues that have a better option than him already. And so he's like a bench player in those leagues. Like I'm in the original Highlander league. I've got Ivan Herrera, Gabriel Moreno, and Carter Jensen, and I don't have room to start more than one of them in my util spot. So it's becomes a supply and demand issue that leads to just a guy like Jensen's value really fluctuating from league to league and even team to team. So it's just, there's so many, and there's a Harry Ford question later that'll touch on this too. I just think it's really useful, like go through all the catchers and just rank them for dynasty and sort of see where you think Carter Jensen slots. And, if you've got him like 11th or 12th, then I don't really see how he could be ranked like top 20 overall among all prospects. But I mean, if you've got Carter Jensen ranked like 5th for dynasty among catchers, then I think he should be higher, but I don't have him that high. I really like him. I don't want to be seen as a Carter Jensen skeptic. So I guess I'm curious what Thomas's projected slash line for Jensen would be this year, but not really concerned about him at all. I just think it's challenging to rank catchers in a way that makes sense across leagues and across formats. But yeah, I respect the disagreement there from Thomas. All right, a couple of Luis Pena questions. Frappy said, is Luis Pena of the Brewers at $4 a stash in Autonew with a $400 budget, which increases $1 per year, knowing he won't contribute for a couple of years? I'd probably keep Pena at $4 in Autonew, especially if most or all of my like top 30 to 50 prospects are rostered already. I play in one Autonew league, a RotoWire staff Autonew league, and I'll be keeping Bryce Reimer of the Tigers for $3 in that league, and they're right next to each other in the rankings. So I think that makes sense in that specific format for Pena, but it's sort of on the borderline. And then Fantasy Baseball Guy said, I'm curious why Luis Pena fell so much. Pena didn't even have a down arrow. He went from 18 to 27. And yeah, I feel really good about where I've got him ranked. Feel good about the players I've got around Pena. I moved guys like Carson Benj and Ryan Waldschmidt ahead of Pena. I feel great about those moves. So yeah, read Pena's outlook, but nothing's really changed about Pena. H. Sampson says, I feel that the discourse around Tyler Bremner of the Angels is consistently about the Angels org and less about Bremner, the pitcher. I understand the org helps or doesn't in the Angels case, but I can't help but feel he's a decent value at this point. How do you feel about him? So I know this question kind of sounds like it came from my burner account because I basically said this exact same thing on some first-year player draft pods I've done lately, but I do kind of agree word for word with what H. Sampson said. And I wonder if So he might be perceiving this through these mock first year player drafts that I've participated in, and I kind of think Bremner falls a bit in those, as does Jamie Arnold of the A's, just because he's not really a fun player to take with a top 10 pick in a mock first year player draft. But yeah, I think he definitely belongs in that mix. I had him ranked as a top 5 prospect in the whole class before the draft. And I said on the most recent RotoWire mock first year player draft pod last week that I think Bremner and Jamie Arnold of the A's are becoming the 2 most underrated players in this class just because of their unsexy landing spots. But the Angels aren't bad at identifying players. They got the best player in the 2022 draft in Zach Neto with the number 13 overall pick. And I think Bremner is one of the best players in this class. So, it's not as good, obviously, as if he'd gone to Seattle, but he's definitely a really good pitching prospect. Okay. This is a tough one. So Coco says, would you categorize this upcoming spring training as do or die for Andrew Painter of the Phillies? If he looks awesome, is he back to being a top 15 to 25 MILB asset? If it goes poorly, could you see him falling out of the top 200? Well, not out of the top 200, but more or less it is sort of a do or die spring and then into the early summer, I would say, for Painter. There just aren't many historical comps for a pitcher going through what Painter's gone through the past 3 or 4 years, with just the age, the sort of timeline of dominance, then the amount of time missed with the injury and the surgery, and then returning and kind of being, sort of an outline of the original player, but not having the same sort of results as the original player. So just very, very challenging player to rank. I tried to sort of split the difference. I ranked him in the sort of early 60 range as sort of where I think he would end up with a good spring training or a bad spring training, because I don't know if he's going to have a good spring training or a bad spring training. I think the Phillies have intentionally left a spot open. Taijuan Walker is just a classic swing man. So, if Zach Wheeler's ready, Taijuan Walker can be in if Painter's ready, or out if Painter, or in if Painter's not ready, out if Painter is ready. So I think they have it set up so that a good spring can vault Painter into that opening day rotation. But if he decidedly does not win a job, like he's obviously going to stay outside the top 50 on the late March update, could fall around like 100 on the late March update if he's just really kind of shaky in the spring. But I don't think Pena would fall outside the top 200 in 2026 really at all, barring another serious injury. But you never know. Sometimes pitchers just peak in terms of their dynasty value before they even get to AAA. That could be the case here with Painter. Neil says huge rises for some AL East pitchers in Elmer Rodriguez of the Yankees, and then a couple Orioles in Luis De Leon and Trey Gibson. What brought them up the rankings? Well, I would recommend checking out their outlooks if you want a bunch of detail on those 3 pitchers, but they're actually all pretty similar in that they have full starters pitch mixes, and they can miss bats and generate ground balls at high clips. De Leon, I discussed on the first pod of the offseason with JT, and he was a player who just kind of slipped below the radar. He was kind of doing everything right, and I just didn't really move him up until after the season. So that's my bad on De Leon. Elmer Rodriguez was one of those guys where I got to spend a lot of time digging in on him, more time than I was able to spend all season. And I just kept coming away more and more impressed. I think he's big league ready. I think he's, number 2, number 3 starter at worst. And I think Rodriguez is already better than Luis Gil and Will Warren, and he's a better bet to stay healthy than Ryan Weathers. So I would not be surprised at all if, for one reason or another, Rodriguez breaks camp in the Yankees rotation. Upside and floor with him. De Leon probably has the lowest floor of the 3, but might have the highest ceiling as the lefty. And then Gibson, he had a rough showing at AAA, but I think that was just bad luck more than anything else. And I think we do see Gibson up sometime this summer as well. So, big fan of Elmer Rodriguez and Luis De Leon, and Trey Gibson. I probably just kind of caught up to where other people were on him. Paul Max, what can you say about the double down arrows on Alfredo Duno of the Reds? A guy in my league thinks he's the second coming and will be shocked at this ranking. And then Robert Leahy says there is certainly some Alfredo Duno hype, but I don't understand why it is not nearly as high for him as it is for someone like Rainiel Rodriguez of the Cardinals. So usually when I get multiple questions about the same guy dropping, that means I dropped him too much, and that's probably true here with Duno. The two things that scare me with him are his size. He's 6'3", 248 pounds, and he was at that size as a 19-year-old. And then the length in his swing, the potential contact concerns in the upper levels that could come from that. Pitchers that can locate pitches on the outer third of the plate. I think it could end up being a problem for him. But Duno has, he's got an elite eye at the plate. Like, he's very good at discerning balls and strikes. And then he also has monster power potential, obviously. So I could see him eventually, maybe he gets himself into better shape, finds a way to kind of cover a bit more of the plate, and he makes this ranking look incredibly foolish. But I think it's more likely he just kind of settles in as like a 3 true outcomes type of DH first base type of player down the road, which will still be useful in fantasy, but not the type of player that you want to just really be clutching onto for 2+ years. One other factor in Duno dropping is that I came away very early in the offseason just infatuated with Nathan Flewelling of the Rays. And I just think he's a better player to roster than Alfredo Duno. So I knew I was going to be rising up Nathan Flewelling. He's younger. He's a better bet to stick at catcher. I think he's got a similar upside as Duno if they both stick at catcher in fantasy. I think different statistical outlays, but Flewelling has upside. I think he's got a higher floor than Duno because of the catcher defense. And so they just kind of cross paths in that 115 to 130 range of the rankings. I didn't think I could put Flewelling in the top 100, but I also just definitely prefer him to Duno in Dynasty. So very complicated there. I love trying to rank catchers, but it's certainly a challenge. BitCloud says, who are some catchers you think could move off the position? So I have 19 players on the top 400 who are listed as catchers. And of those 19, I think Rainiel Rodriguez of the Cardinals, Josue Briseño of the Tigers, Ike Irish of the Orioles, and Duno are the 4 most likely to lose catch eligibility shortly after reaching the majors. And Samuel Basallo, Carter Jensen, they're going to get a bunch of starts at DH, but they're going to catch enough to retain the eligibility. Mank Baseball says, can I ask why Harry Ford of the Nationals has dropped a long way? I'd have expected his trade to have given his value a boost. Yeah, this is definitely, I can see how this would be very confusing because his trade it's good for him, but I knew I was going to be lowering him a bunch before the trade. So, I definitely understand how that's confusing. Basically, like I got invited to go on Eric Cross's Toolshed podcast and earlier this offseason, and I was able to kind of pick which position and whether I wanted to do dynasty or prospects. And I picked to do catchers dynasty rankings. So ranking all the catchers for dynasty. And I wanted to do that because I thought it would be the most useful for me to kind of go through that process and just sort of figure out like, okay, who is the who's the 30th ranked catcher for dynasty? Who's the 20th ranked catcher for dynasty? Because that helps you kind of figure out like what is replacement level in leagues where 20 catchers are started, 30 catchers are started, et cetera. So basically I did that, and I found that I had Harry Ford kind of ranked in the 30 to 35 range among all catchers when you're factoring in prospects and big leaguers for dynasty. So in some leagues, that basically means he's a bench catcher or even a waiver wire type of player. If you only start 15 catchers and he's the 32nd best catcher, then do the math. But obviously, in leagues where you start 30 catchers, then he is quite valuable. And the one thing that he does that most catchers don't do is I think Harry Ford could be a double-digit steal guy. But I also think, if we're ranking like 35 catchers for Dynasty, Ford would probably be in the bottom 5 for home run upside. So interesting player, fun player, but that going through that process and just ranking every single catcher for Dynasty, I found to be very useful for me just for doing these rankings, because if I think a guy is the 33rd best catcher for Dynasty, then they're not that valuable. Sneaky Turtle says, I'm curious how you see the NPB and KBO. Would they be equivalent of AAA or a step above AA? I've personally seen NPB equivalent to AAA and KBO a step below AA. Am I way off on those? It's complicated because the game is just so different. But I think you actually nailed it. I think like NPB roughly equivalent to AAA, KBO a touch below AA, but obviously there's just a lot of different intricacies there. But yeah, I think Sneaky Turtle is on top of that one. Freaky Fat Guy says, I'm a Mets fan and grabbed AJ Ewing and Jacob Reimer in our rookie draft, but someone is telling me Elian Pena of the Mets is going to be better. I see he's ranked much lower, though. Am I going to regret my decision in a few years? I don't think it matters, though. With Jorge Polanco, Francisco Lindor, Marcus Semien, and now Bo Bichette, the Mets prospects are all locked out. So, Elian Pena, I think it's great that Pena and Reimer are in the same org, because like if Elian Pena in a couple of years is as good as Jacob Reimer is currently, I think that'd be a great outcome for Pena. I think they're like, that's sort of the archetype. If everything works for Pena, he's this sort of above average hit, above average power corner infielder. And that's exactly what Reimer is right now. So don't think you'll regret that one. Freddie Lou says, I play in an open universe league and I'm already looking ahead to the 2026 draft class. Do you have any idea where Roch Cholowsky, Grady Emerson, Jacob Lombard would slot on this list? So as most of you know, I don't track future draft classes until a couple months before the actual draft because so much changes in the months leading up. It wouldn't be a good use of my time, but I do already know that Cholowsky would be in contention for the number 2 overall spot behind Connor Griffin. I would not have him ahead of Connor Griffin. I think Connor Griffin's just got such clear top 3, top 5 fantasy pick upside, and he's big league ready. But I think I would probably have Cholowsky second ahead of Kevin McGonigal. And then my hunch is that I think I'd probably have Emerson, the top high school shortstop, around in that like 15 to 30 range, and I'd probably have Lombard in that like 50 to 100 range. But again, I have not locked in on that class yet. Danny J says, you're not feeling Felnin. What does Felnin Celesten of the Mariners need to do to regain your affection? He's got to make an impact at the plate. He was age appropriate last year and had a 108 ISO or 102 ISO and 6 homers in 104 games. So just not going to cut it. Gabriel Garcia says, surprised to see Miguel Ullola of the Astros fall off the top 400 entirely. Can you talk about why? And he also says Brandon Clarke of the Cardinals also dropped significantly. Can you touch on that? Well, I think, Gabriel, you might have a type because both Ullola and Clarke are likely relievers. I think Ullola is almost a definite reliever at this point, which is why he's off the list. I loved him in the past for his strikeout stuff, but he just didn't take a step forward last year, got passed by several other arms in Houston's system. So Ullola, I would expect to just be kind of a 7th inning reliever. And then Clarke, I don't think he's going to start either. But he, at least there's like a slight chance Clarke could still start. And I think there's a better chance of Clarke eventually getting saves for the Cardinals than there is of Ullola getting saves for the Astros. So that's why Clarke is still ranked, but similar players in that I don't think either has the command to start. And Freaky Fat Guy said Robert Calaz of the Rockies doesn't even make the top 400 anymore. Nope. He'd probably be on a top 500, but he'd be towards the bottom of a top 500, and he was a pretty easy cut on the top 400. Calaz is a power over hit corner outfielder who didn't hit for much power last year at single A. So easy omission there, Robert Calaz. All right. Thanks to everyone for the amazing questions. And again, YouTube 15, if you want to get 50% off, check out the updated top 400 prospect rankings, the top 165 first-year player draft rankings, the first-year player draft blueprint, all live on the site. And again, make sure you're using the My Leagues feature. Thanks again for listening, and thanks again for all those great questions.